Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, everyone, and we're glad you can attend Attitude's weekly ADHD Experts webinar. This one is on how to become an executive function detective. Just some housekeeping before we get started. Have a few things to read. If you've listened to one of our webinars before, you know we offer attendees a certificate of attendance. When the webinar ends, a post-event survey will pop up. It will list 3 questions about the quality of the webinar, followed by 3 questions titled Required for Certificate. If you would like a certificate of attendance emailed to you, you should answer those 3 questions. If you don't want a certificate, then obviously don't bother answering them. Also, today, for the first time, the webinar will be closed captioned. If you are hearing impaired or if you like to read along as you listen, click on the tab titled Live Captions on the left of the screen. A drop-down box of the live captions will then appear. And last but not least, the sponsor of this week's Attitude webinar is Play Attention, Enhance Brain Health and Performance. Play Attention utilizes NASA-inspired technology to strengthen executive function and self-regulation. They will customize your plan and help you thrive at home, school, and work. It includes a lifetime membership. Learn how you can improve executive function and make ADHD your superpower. Click on the hyperlink in the sponsorship statement for a free consultation, or call 800-788-6786, or log on to www.playattention.com. Mention Attitude Mag 0320 and receive 10% off your home or professional program, plus 1 free ADHD assessment. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars, and you should know that sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Now for the theme of today's webinar, a game plan for recognizing executive function shortfalls in children and powerful strategies for improving EFs when you do recognize them. In this webinar, moms and dads will learn to gather evidence from their child, what, where, when, why, interview witnesses, teachers or family members, and consult with experts, teachers, doctors, and therapists to determine the causes of executive function shortfalls, and of course, to learn ways to help your child. We are very happy to have Maureen Bouchard and Karen Uberty here today to help us out. Maureen is a licensed professional counselor who has been working with middle school kids for more than 30 years. She has been educating students, parents, teachers, and administrators about executive function deficits and strategies to improve them. Karen has been teaching students with ADHD for the last 19 years. She has presented on executive functions within her school district, at the Minnesota Education Academy, and at the 2018 ADHD International Conference. She has created and implemented best practice strategies for students with ADHD in the classroom. You can ask questions of Maureen and Karen at any time during the webinar. We will try to get to as many of them as we can after their presentation. To download the presentation slides of the webinar, click the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources. That will be on the bottom left of your screen. If you do not see the Event Resources tab, you need to refresh the page. So now, finally, let me turn it over to Maureen and Karen. Thanks for being here today, helping us out with this big challenge that many parents face.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're excited to share with you our passion of teaching executive functions to teachers and our families. We have a few goals we want to cover for the webinar today. One is that you leave with a basic understanding of what executive functions are. The second is how executive functioning areas of need really can impact your child's success at school and in home, and as well as in their social life. We want you to understand how problem-solving strategies to help you work through conflicts as your children move through the challenging elementary ages, all the way up through those adolescent years. And we have found that quite often the best way to support and help children become successful young adults is to uncover the mystery of what is unique for your child and then support them on their way to independence. Next slide, please.
So the transition years. Let's take a look at what's happening here. We want to talk today about moving through elementary into middle school and then on to high school. The academic and social demands increase like crazy at this time. Peer relationships become very complex. Adolescence brings on emotional and physical changes. Academically, they're asked to do more than they've ever done before. And as parents, you're supposed to be helping them get through this. So as we look at the day and what we have ahead of us, let's take a moment and think. Let's think about your neurotypical average youth. They go through their days, probably with a little bit of coaching, a little bit of support from the adults or teachers, and things go pretty smoothly. They pick up on things, they adjust and monitor and get through stuff. Now, think about your youth with ADHD. It seems like they have more issues. They have more setbacks. They maybe have more disappointments. So why? Why is that? And what we have found out is often these setbacks are a direct relation of executive functions. Students are faced with things that their executive functions can't manage at that point in time. So it's not all of their executive functions are struggling, but maybe one or two of those are. So those ADHD symptoms of impulsivity and attention, hyperactivity, those can start to trigger behaviors as, they face new challenges. That ADHD is a condition of self-regulation. As more is put upon them, greater pressures, more responsibilities. That self-regulation piece is really hard, and it may even make things seem worse. They're worse behaviors than they've seen or symptoms than you've seen before. So at home and at school, you start to give your kids more autonomy, less oversight, more freedom. And that happens in school. And if you have problems with, an attention, organization, all those different pieces, all that freedom and independence can be a big, big challenge for you. So it's harder to do your homework. It's harder to plan. You start to maybe make some decisions that aren't great. And so what we hope is, as parents, and if you're a teacher out there listening, we hope that you can be the support. Once you realize how much executive functions are impacting their choices and what's happening with them, you can be that support. And the reason we want it is because if we don't, there's going to be some really big emotionally charged issues. And sometimes those consequences can be very costly. Next slide.
So it's really important to understand that we use executive functioning common language when talking with our kids. So I use this language every day within my own family, ask my husband and my kids, as well as my students. So today we want to cover executive functioning definitions that work best for our work with students and explain the difference between behavior and cognition in regards to executive functions. Because these skills are what are responsible for the challenges that our students can face. Next slide. So every one of us uses executive functions in our daily lives. Executive functions, right, are all of those skills that we need to complete given tasks. So Thomas E. Brown provides us with a clear understanding of how important it is to realize we all have executive functioning areas of strength and weaknesses. And every single one of us does things well, and we've learned those skills to continue to do those things well. But we also have areas of need, or we like to refer to that as or areas of need that kids need to improve on. So the best way to share this with our students is to use that common language when we describe executive functions. By understanding our students' lagging executive function skills or areas of need, we can teach them those strategies on how to advocate for themselves in the real world. So that would include their school life, their home life, as well as those social interactions with their peers. Next slide, please.
So here's a chart of executive function. It's Thomas E. Brown's model. We really like using this model when we introduce these concepts to our students at school or when we're talking with parents and trying to teach executive function awareness. So the executive functions that are listed there are attention, focus, effort, emotion, memory, action. That's how Thomas Brown breaks them down. Keep in mind that these are all the skills you need to be successful at school, be successful in your relationships with people, to go out into the world of work and manage yourself. So these things work together. If you have a child that is struggling with one or two of these areas, sometimes it's okay and they can build upon themselves. But if they are so impaired in some of these areas or multiple areas, then it becomes really hard. So again, like your average, youth, they can pick up and develop these skills as they go along. our ADHD kids sometimes have 2 or 3 or more of these that are impaired, and then it's really hard. And that's when they face these expectations that they really don't have the skills for. A few things to keep in mind is, our adolescents, as I work with them in a middle school, I think every ADHD kiddo that I've worked with, has some really strong executive function. It seems as if it's maybe stronger than their average peers, or it's just really good. And we really, really try to emphasize those things, celebrate those things, use what's really strong and what you can do to help you with the rest of those things. I also just want those kiddos to make sure they embrace those skills and go out and use them in their areas of interest, their sports, their arts, their creative, whatever they can build with. And that helps build the skills across the board. When they have success in one of those things, they can transfer it to other areas. Next slide.
So as we work through this presentation, it's important to understand that there's lots of models which explain executive function. So expert others use the language of working memory, flexible thinking, inhibitory control. So when researching executive functions on your own, be open to seeing there's lots of different models. We just break it down a little further because we have just found that language works best for our work with our students. So don't be overwhelmed when researching executive functions, and just take what you can to keep growing your skill set as a parent. So just a couple other sources we're using for today's presentation that are, phenomenal resources. Harvard University, obviously Dr. Russell Barkley is a great resource, Peg Dawson, as well as Ross Green. Next slide, please.
So breaking these executive functions down a little bit more. And again, we use these with our middle schoolers, and they make sense to them, and they can make sense to your own children. They can make sense to your spouses if you want to talk about them that way also. So executive skills are kind of broken into 2 components, the doing and the cognition. These are the doing ones that you see here. These are the behaviors. So the emotional control, response inhibition, attention, initiative, persistence, and flexibility. So like I said, those are the things you observe or can see. Sometimes kids are negatively labeled because they can't do some of those things, which, sets us up for some difficult cycles. So the other thing is quite often people, and I suppose people who don't work with children a whole lot, think that these just develop normally as a child ages or as they progress through school, but that's not the case. And our ADHD, our students, those are the ones who these things seem to make it more difficult for them to get through a lot of the social aspects, a lot of the home aspects, and a lot of the school aspects. So if we don't take a look at what's happening with these needs, that again is when we see the conflicts and the repeated mistakes made by kids. So these are the behaviors, and we're going to move now on to the cognitive ones. So next slide, please.
So like Mo said, we can also break down executive functioning skills into the areas of thinking or cognition. So cognition executive functions include working memory, organization, time management, metacognition, how well you understand yourself, as well as planning and prioritizing. So skills which involve that thinking or cognition, those we like to think about as the invisible areas of executive function. So these are the skills that can become significantly more difficult as the child becomes older and they want to start to, increasing their independence. So think about all of the ways behavior and cognition impact a child's ability to complete a given task. So if you even have just one weak area in executive functions, that can really impact a student and cause a challenge for them. Next slide, please. So executive function areas of need can show up in a lot of places, but the first time that it might become a bigger issue that you might need to start addressing things is in a school setting. So executive functioning skills that kids need to be successful in school would include working memory, organization, time management, planning, prioritizing, initiative, attention, persistence, emotion control, flexibility, self-understanding. I mean, the list can go on and on. So if your child is an area of need in one of these areas, you may see things like your child all of a sudden has a significant amount of missing work, that they may all of a sudden forget to turn materials in or bring things from home back to school. Their materials can become disorganized, or your child might begin to experience school anxiety. So as educators, we oftentimes see 2 major times when executive functioning areas of need can impact our children the most. And the first is that transition from the elementary school to the middle school setting. In our case, it's from 5th to 6th grade. So transitioning from 5th to 6th grade becomes really difficult because there's so many more independent skills that are required, right? There's changing of classes, there's multiple teachers who all have different expectations. There's increasing expectations at home. You're a little older, you have more responsibility, and kids are involved in a lot more activities once they get to that age. The next age group that we see executive functioning skills really impacted are when kids are entering 9th grade. So at that point, we've left that, not as sheltered as elementary school, but pretty sheltered middle school, to where kids are now on their own, and they're expected to complete their work for grades, and those grades turn into credits, and we know that credits lead towards graduation. So as you can see, our current school system can be a really difficult place to manage if your child has areas of executive functioning need. Next slide, please.
So social interactions, that's also where these deficits show up. So friendship concerns, social media, peer pressure, relational aggression. Your ADHD students and kiddos have difficulty with inattentiveness, impulsivity, hyperactivity, sometimes aggression. And those create multiple difficulties when you're trying to interact with others. Also think about it as, they're trying to make new connections. And if that's the first thing that other kids see, that's kind of tough. As adults too, we can accept a little bit more when the ADHD students might have frequent interruptions, might not be very flexible, might get easily frustrated. Maybe they, don't have all those social skills. As adults, we help work through that. But when they're trying to make interactions with other kids, other students don't, and other children don't really know what to do with that. And it makes that very difficult. So, and keep in mind, like friendship skills are kind of like math skills. You have to learn them and you have to keep developing them. So if you were young and it wasn't easy to develop, as you get older, it's not that much easier. It's also complicated. And sometimes children are with the same group of peers for a long time, and that's complicated. So children who have ADHD may have fewer friends. They may be less likely to be accepted, in some peer groups. They may experience more social rejection. And these things are all directly related to those executive functions of emotion control, response inhibition, behavior control, flexibility, their own self-understanding, and then organization. And just a little bit more on that last one that I listed up there, that relational aggression. So relational aggression, and we see that in middle school. I think it happens maybe late elementary, and I think some of it dies out a little bit later into high school. But relational aggression is really complicated, and it's really hard for parents and sometimes teachers to help figure out what's going on with this, because it so flies under the normal civil behavior and interactions of people. So, it's done covertly, it's done in secret, so people aren't caught. And this is hard for your average child who has some good, solid social skills. But think about your kiddos with ADHD who already are struggling with social skills. They are trying to figure out how all this social maneuvering works. How do I fit into that group? And then they are thrown this whole new set of rules that really don't apply there. They twist things. So relational aggression is hard for your average kids. It's even harder for your kids with ADHD. But we can support them. We can get through this. So next slide, please.
So executive functioning needs can also impact your home. You may now see your child having more difficulty with a sibling. Helping your child with homework can begin to cause stress and chaos maybe where it hadn't before. Expectations around mealtime or what your child eats may become a struggle. In my child's case, it was not eating when we had planned dinner time, or she also was always standing, right, when the expectation was to sit down. So you may see your child not able to complete responsibilities that also would be age appropriate or things you would expect them to do. So the examples listed above can, again, be significantly impacted by your child's needs and executive function. So things that we would need to do these skills: time management, self-control, emotion control, behavior control, flexibility for both the child and the parent, and self-understanding are just a few of those. So after the last three slides, we can now see how school, social interactions, and home life can all be impacted, oftentimes in a negative way, by that lack of executive functioning skills. So it can be eye-opening for a parent to begin to recognize the challenges our children can experience that are, directly related to those executive functions. So when we see these challenges in our day-to-day lives as a parent, we want to step in, we want to intervene. So this is where we want to help you learn how to best support your child by becoming an executive functioning detective. Next slide, please.
So here's this little graph that we created. And, as a parent or a teacher, more and more is expected of your child. If they have areas of need in their executive functions, there's going to be some challenges. That's where those conflicts and repeated mistakes take place. We really want to break that cycle. If we don't break the cycle, it's going to keep repeating itself. Areas of need, conflicts. Area of need, conflict. So when school and social expectations are too much for your child, that's where we need to take a break and figure out how to support them. Sometimes conflicts are easily worked out. Some things are easy to figure out with your child or with your teachers and that kind of stuff. But sometimes the solutions are hard to find. It's like, what's really going on? Why does this keep happening? What can we do differently? And everybody feels bad. So what else can you do? Well, that's where we hope to take you here in the next little bit. We want to make sure you have a good understanding, what executive functions are, and that you dig deep to figure out where your own child's are. We want you to be aware that that's their area of need and that you can start having healthy, constructive, purposeful conversations to support them with that. And with those awarenesses in place and knowing what's going on, you can build a foundation. You can build a foundation to start solving problems. And once you have that problem-solving approach there, it can be used over and over again because we know there's always challenges around the corner, which then build to stronger family relations. So that's where we'll go from here. Next slide, please.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that we need to just take into account as parents. So we know that when problems arise for our kids, our gut reaction is to just solve it for them. At least it is, in my case as a mom. But there's some really important things we need to remember before we just jump in and intervene. Next slide, please. So we have three main jobs as a parent when we problem solve situations with our kids. And the first role as a parent is to advocate for our kids, no matter what their age. You know your child better than anybody else. But it's important to remember to stay calm, and our job is to help our child overcome that unmet expectation by working together. The second thing to remember is to be honest with yourself and your child about what the problem really is. It can be really difficult to see that your child is struggling, but seeing the problem through an honest lens, hopefully cross your fingers, will help you, which helps your child, focus on the problem and not the reaction or that emotion that's tied to the problem. Finally, we need to let go of those preconceived thoughts. There may be a lot more going on than what we originally thought. So it's important to take a step back to look at that whole picture while we're gathering information. So today we're going to walk you through how to use specific strategies and tools for problem solving together, which in turn will lead to helping our kids become those independent problem solvers, which is, of course, our ultimate goal. Next slide.
So here's the process. How are we going to uncover the mystery? How are we going to become detectives? Well, there's task 1, identify the persistent unsolved mystery. Task 2, gather evidence from the child, the what, the when, the where, the why. Task 3, interview those witnesses, maybe other people that are seeing the situations, the teachers, other family members. Task 4, create a plan for success by working with your child. And then task 5, if we need, you can bring in experts. And possibly another way to look at this and help frame it when you're working with your child is think about the great detectives that we know. It's pretty standard. They kind of follow the same process. And that's the process we've kind of laid out here for you, except you're really going to take in your child's perspective. What would Nate the Great? What would Nancy Drew? What would Shaggy and Scooby-Doo do? They can solve their problems in half an hour. How about us? Let's try to find a standard way to work through things. And a few takeaways from this is that this doesn't cost any money. It only really takes a lot of patience, some communication, some really good communication skills. It's not going to be hard once you learn how to do it. And if you put time into it early on, the benefits are always there because you can always just go back to this model, and it doesn't have to be more conflicts, more big issues going on. So when it's done well, it's an incredible process, and we can use that going forward. Next slide.
All right. So task 1 may be the most important step in that entire process because we're going to identify or name the problem that we see. So Is it a failing class that our child has? Is it a disagreement that's ongoing between siblings? Is there a significant amount of missing assignments for school? So it's important to share with your child that your ultimate goal as a parent is that they will learn how to solve problems on their own. But right now, we need to work together so we can teach them those tools and skills on how to do that. So between you and your child, for task 1, you're going to decide what's one thing right now you want to focus on. And this is going to maybe take some time to determine that one challenge, right? You may have a different perception than what your child does of what that challenge is. So you might need to start small. But doing more than one at a time or more than one challenge at a time can be overwhelming for both of you, but really more for your child. So this task truly needs to be identified by both of you in order to be successful. But once you've mutually agreed on that one challenge, you're going to own it. You're going to write it down. You're going to, dedicate your time to working on this one challenge alongside your child. I want you to put it in a place where you see multiple times a day. Is it the refrigerator? In my family, we put everything on the kitchen cupboard. Is it a bathroom mirror? But it's really important that you do this because then you're always reminded this is the one thing that we're working on, and we're working on it together. It's our common problem we want to solve. Next slide. So in order to move forward in assisting our children, right, we need to identify the area of executive functioning need or needs that our child is struggling with. And, like I said, it may be more than one, but it's necessary to see that the task your child is having difficulty with is directly related to that executive functioning area of need. So this is where it becomes important that as a parent, that you have that strong background or understanding of executive functions. And if you don't have that strong background or understanding, the process can take longer to get through because you're not using that common language. Maureen and I teach an 8-hour course. We've given multiple presentations for families and for teachers to understand executive functions and how they have an impact on our children. So we know better than anyone that time invested is really needed in order to work through this process. So here's where we may need to change our mindset about the challenge our child is facing. And this was mind changing for me as a parent when I started to do this. We look at that area of need or challenge as an area of executive functioning need. It becomes easier to help our child through that process, right? We can start to see what those things are that are breaking down, that are causing our child to have problems or struggle. So if we as parents and teachers don't recognize that executive functioning area of need is really impacting our child's ability to be successful, that's when we get stuck in that chaos mode or that conflict will continue to repeat itself. Next slide.
So the second task, what detectives would do next, would be they gather evidence from the child. So you're looking for the what, the where, the when, and the why. We're not solving problems yet. We're gathering information, and we're gathering their information. So we have to kind of check ourselves and listen. You can't really do this in the heat of an emotional conflict. You can't really do it if both people aren't at the same place and time and are in the right mood, I guess. And it should be a chance to, build your communication skills. So you might say, hey, I'd like to talk about this a little bit later on with you. Could you think about a few things and then we can meet later on and talk about it? The other pieces that I mentioned, Shaggy and Scooby-Doo there in the past. But the reason I put those in there is because if you use some understanding of where your child's at, if you use a little kindness and a little sense of humor, it's going to break down those barriers because kids probably feel like they're always in trouble when it comes to solving some of these things. So if you can break down some barriers, it helps with how the conversation is going to go. And you can help frame getting the information from your child. So there's different things that you can do. You can lead them with, what's their view of it? How did they feel when it happened? Is it similar to anything else? Is it similar to something they've experienced in the past? Or is it something, that they're afraid of in the future? Keep in mind, they want to become independent. They want to break away from you, and their peers are meaning a lot to them. So is there evidence from what's happening that has to do with those things? Are they trying to break into a new set of friends, or did this happen with a group and they didn't really know what to do with it? Sometimes the where and when can be a little confusing because maybe kids hold it together all day long at school and they come home and they let it out on you, and it wasn't really anything to do with you, but it might have been what happened at school, or what they put up with at school all day long. So you are in the process of hearing from them. You want to get their view of things. So it's also a great chance to teach your kids, about triggers and about feelings. We all know probably at this age the things that trigger us and how then we react. As you go through adolescence, some of those triggers seem to explode and get bigger. So you can teach your child while you're talking to them, like, some of these things happen. Is this what was a result of it? Or you can talk about feelings, and feelings will probably come out in some of this, and, give some understanding to your child. Like, little kiddos, lots of time they feel mad, sad, angry, or scared. But if you dig a little bit deeper, there's probably some more feelings buried in there, and you can help your child process those things. So, it's just a chance to really hear from them, so you can get the view from them. And it's probably always really surprising if you find out what the challenge is in their mindset, because it's probably different than the one that you thought was the mindset. Next slide, please. So again, here we are. We're at that stage where we want to look at the reasons these repeated mistakes are happening. And we want to get to the mystery of it. We don't want to get stuck. We don't want to slide back. We want to keep going forward. And, you have to believe that everybody wants to go forward. Your children or your students, they don't want to stay not being successful or moving along and things. They don't like those sad or those hard feelings. So everybody should be, hoping to make progress. Let's get somewhere. And once you're aware of their needs and how it plays into the conflicts, it helps on our next task 3.
Next slide, please. So task 3 involves interviewing witnesses. So at this point, we're still in the process of gathering as much information as we can to make informed decisions with our child. So who better to ask than the people that surround our kids? So these witnesses could have insight as to what the challenge may be or triggers that make the challenge worse. They may also have an idea of what could decrease the behavior or the challenge. So these people could include everybody from teachers, tutors, coaches, other family members. In my family's case, there are clergy members who know my kids really, really well that could have insight. So think of all the adults that interact with our children throughout the day, and you want to tap into those resources. So let these witnesses know that you're gathering as much information as you can, because you want to work with your child to help come up with a solution to their challenge. So at this point, though, we're still just gathering information. We're not making any decisions yet. Next slide, please. So up until this point, we have identified the persistent problem, which in turn identifies the area of need or needs our child has with executive functions. So next, we need to put on those detective hats again, and we're going to continue to gather that information from our child and those witnesses who could provide us with facts, who may not have, we may not have seen as a parent. So after we've completed task 1, task 2, and task 3, those are all done. Now we can move on towards that problem-solving collaborative step. Next slide, please.
So problem-solving together. You're going to learn strategies to solve the problem with your child. You're going to share ideas. You're going to want to create a plan that works for both of you. And then you're going to want to set a time to reevaluate it and make changes if necessary. So how does this work? Well, you now know, what your child is like. You want to support them with some compassion and some kindness and some awareness of how they got into the situation or what the situation is. You want to listen to what they're saying. You want to validate what their experience is or how they see things. And it may not be anything that you would have ever felt like when you were young, but to them it's real. So validate it. Just say, I can understand how that, all right, maybe you don't understand. I can see why you would feel that way. Wow, that must be a bummer. Let's talk some more about that. So you want to continue to help your child practice making decisions. We all want our kids to someday be independent and self-reliant and self-responsible. And it's a great place to practice making decisions while they're still at home with you.
In a safe place.
Yeah, and that's safe. Yes. Thank you. So if we can practice making decisions, working together, that gets us places. So this is also the place where you share the parenting aspect of it and your parenting aspect of it. You can share what you are concerned about. You can share what you observed or what the conflict looked like to you. You can share that, wow, if this doesn't change, or if we don't make some changes, there's going to be some consequences really soon that are really going to impact the child, or on down the line, there's going to be big consequences. So, this is where you share your perspective. This is also the place where, we're not talking about this kind of problem solving when you're dealing with the basic safety and security of your child, because those things always have to be the parenting responsibility. But that's where we want to support our child. So how do you go about this, creating a plan? Well, the child can say, something that they've thought about and come up with, and you share. You may have to come to a place where you both at least agree on something, a piece of this, and then you try to work out a plan. And as a parent, as you try to come to this joint agreement, like I said, this is a great place for children to practice decision making. You might hear something that they're saying that maybe really won't work out. But if they feel strongly about it and they want to give it a try and their safety and security is okay, maybe you agree to that part, because remember, you're going to reevaluate a little bit later on, and you can take a look at it on down the line. So you both put out your ideas, you both try to create a plan, you try to agree on the plan, and then you agree that we are going to check back and see how things are going. And if we need to make changes, we'll make changes. Next slide, please. So again, here we are at our chart here. We've found the executive function area of needs. Hopefully we're getting past those repeated conflicts, repeated mistakes. We've tried to put in some problem solving. Ross Greene is an excellent author who's written some great books on working with children and communicating with children. And he has great ideas. So if those are other sources out there that you could reach out to. But now, the stronger family relationship place. Why is this so great? What do we get out of this? Okay. Well, when you problem solve with your child together, they learn some great life skills. They're going to learn that they can have empathy for others. They're going to learn that what they do impacts others. Sometimes at their stages of growth, they're pretty egocentric, but this is a great place to explain, well, when you do this happens here, or when this happens here. And you don't want to be shaming them or making them feel bad, just talking about it in a logical, consequential way. They also get to experience how, we can work with people and we can talk to people like our parents or our teachers, and we may not agree on all things. We may have our strong opinions. We may not agree on everything, but we can find some neutral ground or some places that we can agree to be respectful of. And so it's just great communication skills. And once you have this in place, you're going to be able to your child's going to be able to express themselves more freely with you. They're probably not going to want to hide every feeling or emotion they have, because you actually listened to what they said. And it just helps build stronger executive function skills, because they're going to have some confidence, they're going to have some practice, and it's just a way to set them up for more success. So I guess next slide, please.
So task 5 is a task that we may not all need. But if we've gone through the first 4 steps, and we still have that unsolved challenge, this is where we may need to involve other people. So task 5 really focuses on asking for outside help from those expert others. So again, this task might not be needed, but it's important to use if your child's executive functioning skills are impacting them in a way that's keeping them from doing things that they enjoy, or is just impacted their lives in a way that you're just not able to move forward. So we're strongly of the belief, as an educator, as a counselor, that it's important to access that mental health support before a problem arises. So your child has the opportunity to build that relationship with a professional when a crisis, or if a crisis were to occur, and they would need somebody, you've already got that communication line started. So experts can include everybody from your child's teacher, administrators involved at your school, medical doctors, your child's pediatrician, or other mental health specialists, therapists, things like that. You might realize that your child might need a formal diagnosis. You may need to go the route of looking for the formation of a 504, or, you might need to have an educational assessment completed for, a special ed assessment done in order to, help your child maneuver all of these different things. So it's important to take all that information that you've gathered from steps 1 through 4 or tasks 1 through 4 and share those with those expert others when you get to that point. Next slide, please. All right, so now that we've covered those 5 tasks that we need to help solve those executive functioning challenges alongside with our child or with your student, if you're a teacher, and we want to run through some common problems that we see at school. So I'm going to talk about the academic one since I'm the teacher. So we're going to talk about a kid who the parent sees their child at home every night working on that math homework, sitting at the table, but for whatever reason, that child is not passing math class. They have all this missing work, they're failing. This is a huge concern, right? So task 1 is completed. The child doesn't feel good about this. The parent doesn't feel good about this, that they're not doing well. It's that agreed upon challenge that they're going to work on. So step 2 is then where we gather that information from our student, asking the who, what, where, when questions. Is the student able to complete the assignment? Because, they're sitting at the table and they look like they're working really hard, but it's just not coming together for them. Or is that the kid has the same 5 math worksheets completed, but they're all crumpled up in the bottom of their locker. They just can't get them from point A to point B. So again, those are 2 totally different challenges that if you're not gathering that information from your kid or from your student, you're not going to, you really know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Again, I always encourage people to take notes. You are writing down as everything that your child is sharing with you. But at this point, we're not interjecting any of our own thinking because we're still, detectives. We're still gathering information. So moving on to task 3, this is where we would interview witnesses. And in this case, the best witness would be the child's teacher. What does the teacher see? Is the child asking for help during class? What is the teacher's process for turning in work? That might be different as well. Is it electronic? Do they need to stay in their notebook? Does it need to be taken out of their notebook? So going through these steps will help us clearly see that picture from someone else's point of view as well. And then asking, is there anything else or anyone else that would have information, regarding this problem? So after we've gathered all that necessary information from our child and in all of the witnesses, that's when we can move on to step 4, where we can schedule a time to work with our child to sit down and really figure out, okay, what is our plan? Is it that we take pictures of our math each night? Maybe we need to access a tutor, whatever it is. But you both need to agree that this is what your part of the solution is going to be. And again, I always tell people, write it down, post it in a spot where you can refer back to it often, and then schedule a time when you're going to come back and you're going to look at that solution, right, and make those changes or adjustments as needed.
Okay, so the other example up there is more with the social emotional aspect. So I see my teen get really angry, blow up, cry when they arrive to school, just a few minutes in time to get into the building and get to the meeting that they wanted to go to. It's a morning meeting. But all of a sudden they're really upset. They can't calm themselves. As a parent, now I'm late for work. So what's going on here? Now, this would be one of those situations where you really can't problem solve on the spot because there's a lot of emotions flowing around. It's good to come back later on in the day or the next time you can really have a chance to talk and find out what is really the problem here. I mean, in this situation, in this family, the problem was there was so much that had to go on in the morning before people could actually get to the place they need to for work or for school. So transportation issues had to be figured out. People had to communicate. There was always never knew really how the roads to school were going to be. So the problem was in this one was the early morning, the morning plan. So that was a challenge here. Then we had to gather evidence. And this is where it's always pretty eye-opening. If you really listen to what the teen or the child is saying, your perception probably doesn't match what they were really struggling with. So the what, the where, the why, the how, ask those questions and see what they share with you. Remember, you got to check yourself because you just want to be gathering evidence here. Again, you're going to have to keep some of the emotion reserved if some of it brings up some feelings. And kids can get pretty emotional too when they talk. So we might have to lay it out. Let's keep this on a problem solving approach. Let's keep it calm. So after you gathered evidence, and in this situation, it was really interesting because what we found out is the child did not want to walk into a meeting, even though it hadn't started, if she would have to walk in the front of the room where the door was and have to walk by the upperclassmen and then try to have to find a seat. So, coming from someone who it doesn't really matter when I walk into a meeting necessarily, that was something different. It's like, wow, that's really hard for her. So finding out their perspective is important. Okay, so interview witnesses. In this case, there's other people in the morning situation here. There's her dad, there's actually her older brother. There's people who have views of what's going on and have ideas of what maybe is the problem, and they can be listened to and put into place. And of course, then when it comes to the problem solving piece, in this situation, it had to be both parents and the child because they all had a piece of what was happening here. So different people have to put together what they feel is important, try to come up with a plan, and then make a plan to talk about that later on because it may not work. And again, another part of this piece was you're going to have to review this once in a while. And maybe the night before the issue was one of the good things. So next slide, please.
All right. So hopefully you're going away today with that basic understanding of executive functioning skills and those executive functioning areas of need and how those can directly have an impact on your child's success at home, at school, and in their social life. Once you understand your child's executive functioning areas of need, when a crisis or a problem occurs, then you can see the problem with that greater understanding. So you're going to be able to see the why challenges can be more difficult for them to overcome alone. By taking that detective approach, you can genuinely support your child, help them build those executive functioning skills, and set their path for greater independence.
And so hopefully you can feel it. But Karen and I have a really strong passion and a really big effort to make sure that all of our children that have ADHD get to turn out to be all the things they can be in life. And we've given presentations and tried to work in our schools and work with families. And we think you can do things. You can help build bridges and work on things. So thank you for listening to us today. Please continue to advocate for your children. If you have any questions, there's our website. I forgot to remember consulting. We'd love to hear from you if you have any other questions or concerns. And thanks for continuing on this executive functioning journey for your children.
Well, that was great. We have a lot of questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. A lot of parents saying they went to the school to talk about executive function problems of their child, and the teachers either do not understand what they're saying or they're saying that the child is lazy. And parents are saying how to get teachers to understand that these are not deliberate behaviors, let's say not turning in assignments or working slowly in class. We've gotten at least 6 questions like that. So I wondered what your approach would be.
I'm going to take this one if you don't mind. So I would have said 10 years ago, I probably would have been in the same boat. I wouldn't have had, I actually did. I had a parent come in and they told me their child was struggling with executive functions. And I looked at our special ed director and I said, I don't even know what executive functions. I don't know what they're talking about. It took me to go through, some very personal things in my life and to spark this, need of, I really need to help all of the students that I'm working with. My background, I was 16 years, I was a special ed teacher, and I didn't have an understanding of executive functions that was strong. So it really took me to have that realization of, look, I have all these kids I'm working with who have an ADHD diagnosis. They're, that's what their IEP is showing. I need to learn more about this. And so I took it on myself. So even within our own building and in our district, I think it's been a very slow kind of recognition of executive functions. So my, suggestion to you would be, if your child has an IEP or 504, start with that person first. That person who's in charge. Is it a case manager? Is it an administrator? And really share, as much information as you can by providing articles from Attitude Magazine. That's kind of where I started. I would share those, share those articles, websites, books that I have found that were really great, just so that dialogue, and, as you could see, like half our presentation was about learning that executive functioning language. Because if you can put those names to it, I think it just totally changes the mindset of, educators and people who work with our kids who struggle with that.
Mm-hmm. I think you can reach out to the leaders in those buildings or the sites, because, teachers are expected to do a lot of things, and this hasn't been around or common knowledge for everyone. So sometimes there needs to be training, sometimes there needs to be exposure. But if administrators and the people who are making those decisions might need to hear that there's a need for this, or, hey, can you look into this a little bit more for our kids? Because it'll impact a lot of kids and help them out if the message can get out there.
Okay. Is there a good way to easily measure one's executive functions or a child's executive functions? Are there tests, online things, just to be evaluated? I mean, what would be some efficient ways to measure them?
I think all the authors and writers that we've given credit to throughout this have some really great information. The CHAD conference has a lot of great information. If you start looking up executive functions and see if they're from valuable resources, like Harvard and stuff like that, I think you can start to uncover things. There are some great workbooks out there. Look who we've given credit to. They have some great resources.
We also provide a tool gathering information sheet on our website. Also, the brief is one that your child's school psychologist could also administer to help gather information as well. So your school district would be another resource.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does medication, help improve or sharpen executive functions?
I guess in my experience as a middle school counselor and having watched things over the years, I think different people have different opinions about medication. The thing that I think, as I've seen as a good kind of baseline, is I think in the elementary ages, a lot of interventions can help support, your ADHD kids in those younger ages and stages. As they go on up and a lot of things really start to show up in 4th grade or 5th grade when math gets hard, things start to show up. So, then it might be best to get like an intervention specialist with them or a therapist who can give you guys some ideas and some strategies. In middle school, if there isn't some good foundations earlier on, sometimes medication is a piece of the puzzle so they can work on all the other skills. It's not the answer to everything. Sometimes it takes a long time to figure out which one is best for the child. It's not the solution, but sometimes it can give the child some more calm so they can learn the skills.
That pause, right? We talked about that pause that sometimes our kids need in order to make those decisions, and medication can help with that.
Yeah. So in my experience, when they're in middle school or high school, they probably need, some good interventions from the school, probably hopefully a therapist that the child can talk to if they need to, and a good pediatrician or a doctor who can support or give insight into the medication aspects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Several parents asking about IEPs, how to write EF accommodations into the IEP. Any general tips about that? Maybe making the goals more specific?
As that former career of mine as a special education teacher, before I moved into the general education classroom, I spent a majority of the last few years of my career really working with kids who had executive functioning goals. And this is where you really need to tap into your child's needs by checking in with your child. Oftentimes, I'm a middle school teacher. We would have IEPs that come in that were very that were vague, or that had accommodations or modifications or things in their, with their executive functioning goal that the child really didn't even know about. So this is where you want to make sure that that child or your student is part of that conversation. What is it that they truly need? Do they really need extended time for tests, or is it that they need a quiet spot for test taking? Do they need a movement break built in? When do they need that movement break built in? So I think by, using an executive functioning tool or quiz, or not quiz, but information gathering sheet. By having a child fill those things out, that's where I would always write my present levels of performance for my students when I would write their executive functioning goal. So by taking that from either the brief that your school psychologist has administered, or really sitting down with your child and looking at what are their needs and what is it that they're looking for, that's where your goal should be written from.
What about tools, either online or print or from any source, to help build executive function skills? Do you have any recommendations there?
Well, again, I think some of those authors that we referred to, and if you ever get to hear them speak, they're amazing. Harvard has some great resources on their site. Not that people should just Google everything, but there are some great tools out there. You just want to check where they're coming from and their sources. So,
do you suggest social skills groups for those kids suffering with executive functioning? What would you? Several parents have said my kid's a sophomore in high school and he doesn't have one friend. So a lot of social skills questions.
Yeah. When it comes to social skills, one of the things that I think is the most impactful or the best is if you can find things that your child would enjoy. If they can go do an activity, and this might take a little work on your part, and it may never be an activity that you have ever thought of in your whole entire life. But if you can find an activity that they might enjoy, once they get to that activity or that club, they're probably going to find some kids who have a similar interest or a common theme. Mm-hmm. So now you're in these situations where the theme or the similar area of interest is how we can interact. And then it's not just all up to the child to, I have to figure out how to make my way with these kids. So you find those common themes, and then through that common themes, and usually there's some adults around that are helping support these environments. I think some of those kind of settings and working through that path is some of the best kind of social skills groups that you can find. I mean, they're genuine,
life. Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. I guess lastly, at what age do you feel it is appropriate to start including children in the conversation about executive function and accommodations on the IEP?
As early as even second, third grade, I think you can start having those conversations. And, I said earlier in the presentation, I use that language with my family. I wasn't joking, right? I use that language every day. I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old and my husband too. And I've been using this language for a really long time. So I think the more familiar kids are with those terms and understanding what those things are, I think the better off that your child will be when they can start to advocate for themselves. So I say the earlier, the better, and just start having those conversations and using those terms and explaining what those things mean and how they impact you and your areas of strength and your areas of need as well.
And in my experience with kiddos, it's kind of a relief to them when they can put a name to what is so hard for them. Mm-hmm. They've probably heard a lot of negative messages sent their way, and the more they can understand themselves, the more likely they're to get past some of those challenges. And kids are thinking about those things at very young ages. So, start the conversations, build them up, start working on those relationships.
Well, that was great. The hour is up. Great insights and strategies, and everyone who attended had lots of great questions. So, Maureen and Karen, thanks for being here and sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Sure. And thanks to all of the attendees for being here. Once again, today's webinar sponsor is Play Attention, Enhance Brain Health and Performance. Play Attention utilizes NASA-inspired technology to strengthen executive function and self-regulation. The company will customize your plan and help you thrive at home, school, and work. Includes a lifetime membership. Learn how you can improve executive function and make ADHD your superpower. Click on the hyperlink in the sponsorship statement in the slides there for a free consultation, or call 800-788-6786 or log on to www.playattention.com. Mention Attitude Mag 0320 and receive 10% off your home or professional program, plus one free ADHD assessment. We'll see you next week when Joel Nigg will talk about how food dyes affect those diagnosed with ADHD and their behaviors. It should be a good one. See you then, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.